It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Millsy. Back in the hometown commander, but for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the commander in front of us on my quest to out-brew the magic world. This video is the start of a couple-week series I'm doing to end off 2023 called 2023 Year in Review. Some more episodes of Millsy Brews where I'm going to go back to some of the most popular decks of the year and update them up to our Ixalan most recent set, and revisit some decks that did really well or that people had issues with, and do some new brews that didn't make it throughout the year but I wanted to do for one reason or another. Or that, of course, I didn't miss since the channel's only been around for about a year. I've only been doing Millsy Brews for so long. But today we are revisiting probably one of my favorite decks I've ever brewed. Not only for the channel, but for myself that ended up not staying together. And that was Kyler, Sigardian Emissary, Selesnya humans. This deck is a ton of fun for a couple reasons. It's a +1/+1 counter deck, and it's a human tribal deck. And I think for some people that is really important. The reason I wanted to update this deck in particular was because Lord of the Rings gave us a bunch of great new humans that I think are going to make this deck even better than it was, and I think we're going to see that the deck overall got better. But let's introduce Kyler, Sigardian Emissary, a 5-mana 2/2 human cleric that says whenever a human ATBs in our control, we put a +1/+1 counter on Kyler, and then each other human we control gets +1/+1 for each counter on Kyler. What I like about Kyler is humans are coming in, we're getting counters on Kyler, and our whole board gets bigger all the way. And the cool part about this kind of structure is if we put a counter on everything, then everything but Kyler's getting a +2/2, buff if you think about it, because they're getting the extra that got put on to Kyler. And I think that's what makes this deck particularly deadly and hard to deal with, because we're going to go wide and go tall, right? So many decks are good at either going wide or going tall with a few creatures, and this is one of the few decks I've ever played that's actually good at doing both and doing it very efficiently. We're in greens, we have access to things like Trample. We're in whites, we have access to things like Vigilance and Lifelink. And so I think this deck does a very good job at going wide, going tall, and overall overrunning our opponents to win the game in combat. Now, before we get into our kind of key topics of our key ways we're going to win the game by making humans so that we put counters on Kyler, I want to talk about just some of the key humans that we're trying to use in order to help that strategy happen. One of the best ones is Catilda Darnheart Prime. Came out of the same set in Midnight Hunt. It has protection from werewolves, but it says human creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color of this creature's colors to your mana pool. This is an ability that's going to make our deck better and better, because the wider we go means the more mana we have. What I like about this is then we can leave creatures back to block, and if they don't block, then they can tap to play spells, protect our board. And protecting our board is actually one of the really big things we want to do, and we'll talk about that in a second on how many cards we're playing to just protect our board and keep us around as we duke out with our opponents. One of the new humans, we have a couple new humans from Lord of the Rings that all have a very similar ability that says whenever it or another human enters the battlefield, creatures you control get blank. And Baragon to the Guard is one of the new ones we really like from that Eowyn precon that gives all of our humans +1/+1 in Vigilance till end turn. This is a really fun ability because you pair this with something like Trample, and now our humans are going to be hitting harder the turn that these humans come down. And just like something like a Cathar's Crusade, this is going to go off every time a human comes in, which means our humans are going to get bigger and bigger over the course of the turn, hopefully, as we swing in. Champion Lambhold's one of our finishers. Creatures with power less than it can't block creatures we control, and whenever another creature ETBs under our control, we put a +1/+1 counter on Champion Lambhold. This and Kyler out at the same time is going to make it very easy, very quickly, to have our opponents not be able to block our humans, and it's not going to take very long after that point for us to run down our opponents. We have 2 creatures from the original Tarkir block, which of course just got released on Arena, that have always played a big role in this deck. Absent Falconer says each creature you control with a counter on it has flying. And Tuskguard Captain, each creature with a counter on it, +1/+1 counter on it, has Trample. These two pair together to give our entire board, once we're spreading counters out with things like Micaeus or other of our abilities that spread +1/+1 counters to everything, is going to allow us our entire board to have those abilities. really go far as far as dealing damage to our opponents. And then, of course, our newest set added us Roaming Throne, a card that's going to get C play in every tribal deck. Of course, doubling our triggered abilities, which means Kyler is going to get double the +1/+1 counters every time a human comes in and make our board even bigger and even bigger. Of note, Rick, Steadfast Leader, did get a reprint. This is the last time we did this deck, which hopefully will decrease the price of like that, a card that really does help this deck take up to the next level as far as really hurting our opponents. And then Lost in Arc Captain taps down target creature your opponent controls when a human comes in, which again, with these new Lord of the Rings humans with these abilities, it really help us in clearing the way for our big attacks, right? Well, getting into making tokens, one of my favorite token makers in the deck is still Adeline or Splendid Cathar. It only makes, in reality, 3 humans a turn, or whenever we attack for each opponent, we make a 1/1 tapped and attacking it. But remember, those 1/1s can trigger Kyler, and if Kyler's on the battlefield and has counters on it, those 1/1s don't come in as 1/1s. They come in whatever ++ that Kyler is giving them and make them very deadly for our opponents. Not only that, but then we're getting 3 Kyler triggers every combat, which is going to, again, could potentially with a Lamb holdout or something like that, make our opponents not be able to block once we declare that attack, and could lead us to a good outcome that way as far as pushing forward. Increasing Devotion, I finally fixed my mistake and brought this back into the deck because I think it's well worth it. 5 mana for 5 humans with Kyler out is a +5/+5 to the entire board. And if we flash back from our graveyard, we get 10. I think this just makes too much sense not to be in here, and I was probably wrong for not putting it in the first time. And I think it's more than worth it, especially when we have, when we want to just buff the board we have and get in there for some damage to our opponents. We also added that Everything Comes to Dust from the Doctor Who set, because we can convoke with humans and exile all creatures that aren't humans, and it could potentially be a one-sided board wipe. As long as we convoke it with 1 human, it could be a one-sided board wipe that could hurt our opponents. But as far as our other big token producers, we still have Call the Coppercoats, a card I truly love. Can make us a ton of humans and has won me a couple games with this deck, doing this on somebody's end step to get a bunch of humans and get set up. We added back in Unbreakable Formation, which can put a counter on everything and give them vigilance to turn on some of those +1 counters effect. But the other big token producer we just got from Lord of the Rings is Horn of Gondor. Card says when it comes in, we make a 1/1 soldier token, human soldier token, and then we could tap 3 to make X 1/1 humans, where X is the number of humans. That itself, I could see ending some games, or really going a long way as far as ending some games for us, because we're just dumping a ton of new humans on the battlefield, triggering, getting more counters on Kyler, making our board bigger, and I think that's one of those cards that's going to be very easy to get and make, get moving. Other thing, which I can't remember from the deck was before, but it should be, is Legion Loyalty. A card that's just going to give all of our creatures Myriad. And the cool part is, even if one of our legendary creatures has Myriad, Kyler is still going to see those coming in, still going to get counters, and we'll still buff our entire board up and allow us hit harder and harder. And then we added that Virtue of Loyalty in from Wilds of Eldraine, mainly because it gives all of our creatures a counter and untaps them at the beginning of our end step. That's helpful because whether we tap them for mana or whether we attack with them, they're getting untapped, right, and they're ready to go for the next turn. So we talk about making tokens, playing our humans that are fairly cheap on the scale to get more and more counters on Kyler, but as I learned the first time around with this deck, the biggest thing we can do is protect our board. The more we protect our board, the better off we are, because people are going to be gunning for us, because we're going to be getting a lot wider than a lot of people we're talking about. So we have a new piece or two to the deck and a couple old ones. The first one is Boromir from Lord of the Rings. Plays a fun double row because his first ability says whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter it. That could be kind of fun to lock down some decks, but the important one is that second ability. We could sacrifice it to give all of our creatures indestructible to end a turn in the ring temp shoot. This is important because it's instant speed, it's on a creature, just to help protect our board. And someone may even forget about it and use a board wipe and not realize that we have Boromir sitting around ready to protect. Again, ready to protect from in destruction board wipes, but we are going to play some protection to protect us from things like Farewell or Exile board wipes. Next up, we have Clever Concealment, one of my favorite white cards that got printed last year. It has Convoke, and it says any number of target non-land permanents we control phase out. This is the protection spell that will protect us from those exile or bounce board wipes by just phasing them all out, and then we're going to untap with them. And this has definitely won me a few games because people are going all in on that board wipe. You do this, protect yourself, and then you're going to untap with an entire board state of creatures ready to ram down your opponent's throat. Flawless Maneuver and Heroic Intervention, both giving our creatures indestructible. Heroic Intervention adds on that hexproof, whereas Flawless Maneuver we can cast for free as long as Kyler's on the battlefield. And again, I think these are the really important cards for us to have and have the access to. And that's why I like Catilda a lot, because it allows us to tap our tokens to pay for these to protect our board. Inspiring Call, if we can get those counters on all of our creatures, is going to protect them, give them indestructible, and we draw a card for each creature with a counter on it. That's just helpful as well. But this also could be used offensively in combat or defensively to block. And like I said, we added back in that Unbreakable formation, allowing the creatures to have a +1/+1 counter if we do it on our turn, or just giving them indestructible if we have to do this on somebody else's turn. So again, we're adding a lot of this protection in because we want to protect our board, and allowing us to keep our amassed amount of creatures there and ready to go. Other than that, the deck is largely the same as it used to be. I think I added in Feldar Retreat and Tribute to the World Tree as just fun cards to get more counters on all of our creatures and not just Kyler, because again, the more counters we put on all of our creatures, the bigger they get. Feldar Retreat can give a counter all of our creatures when a land comes in and give them Vigilance, and Tribute to the World Tree says whenever a creature comes in, draw a card if it's power 3 grid, or if not, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And this is going to help since so many of the tokens we're making are 1/1s. This will do that. Now, the only bad part about Tribute is if Kyler's out, the creatures coming in will see Kyler's buff for the purposes of this effect. So obviously they would draw us the cards and not get the counters, which I think we want just as well. But we wouldn't, get the counters in the scenario. But again, I like it because it's helpful either way. Either we're drawing the cards if Kyler's out, or we're getting the counters right if he's not out. And I think both of those are beneficial things for us. Well, like I've said time and time again in this series, anytime you brew a deck, there's going to be cards that you consider that just don't make the cut. And I wanted to talk about a couple that were really darn close, and I think would be the first cards I would consider going into testing of whether they would make it back into the deck. The first is Invasion of Gobakon, a battle I've talked about multiple times. When it comes in, we look at an opponent's hand, we exile a non-land card from it. As long as it remains exiled, they can cast it by paying 2 more, but when it flips into the backside, it flips into Light Shield, right? It's the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that attack this turn, and we could sack it to give all of our creatures hexproof and indestructible. I think this card's more than worth the 2 mana. It's not going to be very hard to defeat as a battle at 3, especially if we pick it on the right opponent, and then on the backside it just turns into another free way to protect our board. Next up is Pledge of Unity. Card says put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, then you gain a life for each creature. Again, this fits into some of these other +1/+1 counter strategies that our deck has, as well as it could protect our board, depending on what scenarios we're in. I just couldn't find the slot for it, but again, I think it makes sense and it would fit well into the deck. Same with something like Everybody Lives. This card is great. But it is very expensive at the moment, and I wanted to try to keep some of our cards lower down on the price scale. But it says all creatures gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Players gain hexproof until end of turn. Players can't lose life this turn, and players can't lose the game or win the game this turn. This is a good way to kind of protect on a bad turn if need be. The only thing I dislike about this card is that it's only going to work in the Teferi's protection type scenarios where you're trying to just stop a game from ending. Other than that, I'd rather just play the things that are going to protect my board. Again, I like it. It's good. It's another copy of Heroic Intervention with upside depending on when you play it. So it's a good card. I just wanted to try to keep the cost of the deck at least down a little bit if I could. And then the last card's Overwhelming Stampede. I think Kyla does a great job at keeping our board pretty big. And so I don't think we need the trample enabler of the Stampede too much. But I think we're going to find eventually we need a trample enabler every now and then. We are playing things like Garruk's Uprising, and things like that, but I still think sometimes we're going to need that trample. We can't just rely on that Tuskguard Captain. We can't just rely on just flatly having a bigger board. Sometimes we want that trample, and I think that could help us with that. But okay, there's the deck. There's some of the ads that I think maybe we should add. Let's get into doing a playtest or two. And we open a Temple Garden, a Karn's Bastion, and a Soul Ring, which ain't a bad start. We can get that Cultivate on turn 2, which is pretty cool. if we want to shock in Temple Garden either turn 1 or turn 2, or we could see whether we draw basic. So let's keep this one. We draw basic forest. We're going to go that into the Soul Ring. Can't do it in turn 1 because of course we don't have access to that. Turn 2, we could dump the Augur of Autumn, but I think I would rather put this Temple Garden in tap and get this Cultivate working. We would go ahead and put a Plains onto the battlefield tap to get us another white source. We have a couple double white cards in our hand. We do have enough for that. We do have a couple double green cards in our hand. I'd probably just throw a forest in my hand just to be safe. And now we're in a great spot. We could dump Kyla next turn, or we could keep building. I think it just depends on what we draw. We draw for the next turn. We're at 6 mana. We have a Tusk Guard. We have a Clever Concealment. I think I'd probably just go Augur of Autumn here. That allows us to start looking at the top card of our library. And it says that we could play lands from the top of our library. And then maybe the Tusks. Well, we want to keep some humans right in our hand to play afterwards. My only worry about here running Colorado would be if anybody has removal, they'd kind of be able to know what our deck does. But I think let's do that. Let's run Colorado out here. Prep for the next turn. We draw a forest, put that down. I would say we run Augur of Autumn and the Tusk Guard out. This puts counters on Kyler, giving it trample. But now we're in a good spot where we have a couple really good creatures. That would be, 6 mana, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We now be able to Great Henge next turn, which is a great card to add to our repertoire. We can now look at the top card of our library, which is that Unbreakable Formation. Let's play the Karn's Bastion, healing up to 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mana. Put the Henge down for 2. I almost want to just Legion Loyalty. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're 1 mana off the Legion Loyalty, but we could always outlast the Tusk Guard Champion. This would let us play spells off the top of our library at that point, because we would have 3 creatures with different powers, which would allow us to play that Unbreakable Formation. If not this turn, we draw the formation. We see a Wooded Bastion off the top. I would play that Wooded Bastion off the top. We could play that Call off the top as well. Here, I'd probably play that Loyalty and start swinging. This is going to make our board a little bit bigger. A bunch of these guys will have trample now. And we just keep going. Maybe look to play this Copper Coats to add to our board. But let's go one more on the Goldfish. Toonlander with access to Catilda. I don't mind. We also have that Plowshares, which ain't half bad. There's the farmland. So I'd say let's put down the Canopy. Holds up the Plowshares if need be, but I doubt we're going to need it. Turn 2 and get down this forest, and we're going to pay 1 to play that Catilda down. This allows us now, in the future, for our humans to tap for mana. Get the farmland down, and I think we get the Thalia down here. Start getting our opponent's things to come in tapped. We could have gone for more than that, but I think here we go 4 and Catilda into Kyler. And get ready for our next turn, where we can hopefully drop a couple humans. Now we're at 5, 6, 7, 8 mana if we want to tap them all out for creatures. But I kind of like doing it for 6 here, to get Tusk Guard and Augur of Autumn down and get a couple counters on Kyler. Hopefully we can get an interesting attack here. We see the Shauna is up next. Draw the Shauna for turn. Augur still letting us look at the top. We play that Path of Ancestry, scrying us 1. Put the Beast of them back on top. Play the Shauna, get another counter, and take a swing, because we have a first striker. I think this is a good board state at that point. Draw for the next turn. We see a Plains on top. Play the Plains off top of the deck with Augur of Autumn. We see a Karn's Bastion. Now we have protection. We have Copper Coats to make more humans. Again, we just start swinging. Shauna's going to be pretty big at this point. And all we need to do is get a counter on everything to make it even better, which we can do by tapping Catilda at this point. If we had nothing better to do, we just tap 6, tap Catilda, put count everything. Now they all have trample with Tusk Guard Captain, and now we're going to be hitting for a bunch. As you can see, go wide, go tall, and that's the strategy that we're looking to do. But let me know, what do you guys think of Kyler down in the comments? I'm going to be honest, I spent my time trying to make Eowyn work the way I wanted it to, and trying to make Aragorn work, and I might come back to this deck. This is a deck I really loved, and maybe it's time to come back and have some fun with it. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below, and I will catch you guys next time.